Well, it's time for our press review now. We're starting in the United States, where we have news that Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito Jr. has dismissed concerns over his impartiality in matters surrounding the January 6 riots. Antonia Kerrigan is here to tell us more about it.
Yes, this is the fallout from a New York Times scoop that dates from 2 weeks ago. Pictured here is an upside-down American flag flying in the Supreme Court Justice's garden in the early months of 2021. For a brief bit of context, an upside-down flag is traditionally a symbol of distress, but the upside-down American flag was adopted by the Stop the Steal campaign. That's those who subscribe to the view that the 2020 election was stolen by Joe Biden. Now, today's news is that despite calls for this Supreme Court Justice to recuse himself from any decisions surrounding the January 6th Capitol riots, he has published a letter saying no, he's staying where he is. The right-wing Wall Street Journal, is taking Alito's side. It says the justice has an obligation to sit under the Code of Conduct, and that anyone calling for his recusal are attempting to violate the separation of powers. Meanwhile, the Washington Post takes a much more sarcastic view. Their headline, Samuel Alito has decided that Samuel Alito is sufficiently impartial, drips with contempt. And he responded to the criticism saying, firstly, that it's his wife's flag, not his, and that the reason why he flew it was not relevant for the present purposes. Of course, that's an argument that many will find extremely disingenuous, given his position as a Supreme Court Justice.
All right, for sure, Antonia. We're moving south now to Argentina. President Milei's drastic austerity measures are continuing to hit hard, but the government is determined to stand its ground. What can you tell us about this story?
Yes, so this is a story that Courrier International, a French-based publication, has. It's a tale of tens of thousands of soup kitchens that no longer have enough food to feed those who come knocking at their doors. Milei's government had cut off their supplies at the start when he took power last year. They're now left depending on private donations. 41% of the population in the country live below the poverty line. So you can imagine the outrage when it emerged that the previous government had purchased 5,000 tonnes of food aid supplies and that they were being kept in a warehouse and not being used. There was an outcry from the population and charitable sector. So a court then ordered that these food supplies be released and redistributed. However, the libertarian Javier Milei is very much making his famous chainsaw austerity a hill to die on. He says he will appeal this court's decision so that the food may be kept for natural disasters or an emergency. Many would, of course, argue that an emergency is what's already going on.
All right, and still in Argentina, there's upset on the women's national side as 4 team members take a stand over a football federation they say that treats the women's sport as second tier.
Yes, so this is 4 women on the national side who handed in their resignations this week ahead of a match today against Costa Rica. They said they've had enough of the federation telling them that there isn't enough money for provisions that they consider to be fairly basic. They say they aren't paid on match days, they don't have food paid for, meals paid for on training days, and their families have to pay to come to the stadium. Argentina, of course, holds the Men's World Cup, so it's hard to believe that this is a football federation that doesn't have any money.
All right, and staying with sports, it's big news for baseball aficionados as the history books now tell a whole different story.
Yes, until now, official stats on baseball reflected only the players in what were once considered the main leagues, which were the white leagues. But as of yesterday, history has some new champions. Among them is Satchel Paige, pictured here. They've integrated the records of the so-called Negro leagues, they were called back then, the black leagues and the white leagues, including 2,300 players' statistics from 1920 to 1948. Another newfound champion is Josh Gibson, who is now right at the top of the all-time batting leaderboard. Now, this article by the New York Times explains that it was no mean feat to bring together all of these records, while the very moneyed Major League, the main white league, had comprehensive stats in bound volumes kept over the years. The Black League was a very different story. It's been decades of work by volunteer researchers dredging through local newspapers across the country to put together this more definitive record.
All right, very interesting. And finally, from you, Antonia, a long overdue book has made its way back home to a Helsinki library.
Yes, this is the heartwarming story The Guardian's got today. Arthur Conan Doyle's novel entitled Refugees, a copy borrowed in the 1930s, has been returned 84 years late. It was due back in December 1939, and the excuse that the librarians suspect, is that it was actually due back a month after the Soviet Union invaded Finland. So the borrower may have been occupied with other things at the time, and that may be why the article also makes no mention of any kind of fine. Fortunately so, of course, for the borrower, because 84 years could really add up.
I would hate to think what that comes to. Antonia, thank you very much for that look of the papers today. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back with more news.